the profession's going to evolve into something else, at least in some places, we've got to accept that reality. Because frankly, it's already happened.
Well, I'm really excited about the data tools because individuals can go in and select and export exactly what they want to know about their school district or somebody else's. It is interesting in these interviews to hear the other side. What do administrators expect from us?
Greetings, friends, and welcome to episode 1 of School Library Research Chats. I'm Joyce Valenza, Associate Teaching Professor at Rutgers School of Communication and Information, the LIS department. My colleague, Dr. Brenda Boyer, is with us. In collaboration with IASL, our podcast honors the work and the memory of Dr. Ross J. Todd. In each episode, we'll explore how research in the school library world and related disciplines present critical evidence to inform and hopefully inspire our practice. We are supported by Rutgers University Center for International Scholarship in School Libraries and the Research SIG of IASL. And today we are honored to present to you 2 special guests. Keith Curry-Lance is a consultant with the RSL Research Group, creator and author of the STAR Library Ratings and the LJ Index of Public Library Service, and principal investigator for SLIDE, which is the reason we're here today. SLIDE is the School Library Investigation, Decline, or Evolution. It's a project of Antioch University, funded by a Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Research Grant from the Institution of Museum and Library Services. Deb Kachel teaches online graduate courses at Antioch School Library Media Endorsement Program. She was a high school librarian and supervisor for Pennsylvania K-12 school district for over 30 years. She has taught face-to-face and online courses for over 15 years at Drexel University, Mansfield University, and McDaniel College. Deb is a prolific grant writer and currently the project director of SLIDE. Welcome, Keith, and welcome, Deb. I'm so happy that you're here with us today. I think we are going to start with just telling us a little bit about your recent projects, which I'm sure are going to involve SLIDE. Who would like to get started?
Well, I'll start off. As you probably know, Keith and I have been working together for a long time on the loss of school librarian positions. What we endeavored to do with the SLIDE project, which is actually a 3-year grant, is to dig a little deeper into why school leaders, superintendents, school board members make the decisions that they do to staff school library and technology services for their students. So not only did Keith do a deep dive into the NCES data, going back to 2017, 18.
Deb, could you tell us what NCES data are?
Oh, sure. Sorry, it stands for the National Center for Education Statistics. And one of the reasons that we use that data is because every school district in the United States is required to submit staffing data and other information on an annual basis. So the data that Keith started with was almost 13,000 school districts. And not only did we look at the decline of school librarian positions over the last 2 decades, but then we really wanted to see which school districts by certain characteristics and student characteristics, which districts had school librarians and which ones did not. And then, of course, what we are working on right now, which is the latter part of this 3-year grant, is to interview school district decision makers and find out how they are staffing, why they are making the decisions to either add, reduce, or in some cases, combine different positions. So I'm going to let Keith talk about some of those findings and our recent work.
Thank you.
The first big report we put out from the SLIDE project in terms of statistical analysis is called Perspectives on School Librarian Employment in the United States. As Deb said, it's a pretty deep dive into that NCES data. We wanted to know what was going on in terms of, as she said, both district characteristics and characteristics of students. And we found several things, most of which were not surprising, some of which were quite surprising. One of the things we found that some people are more aware of than others is that what state you're in is a huge factor
Really?
on the level of school library staffing. There are approximately 15 states where there are still actually legal requirements in place that require there to be a school librarian. Sometimes it's as simple as saying there has to be a school librarian in every building. Sometimes it's geared to some level based on the number of students enrolled in the district or in the school. But in any event, there's this small group of states where it's pretty much mandated that there be school librarians. Needless to say, that's not the case in the vast majority of states. And we found that to be a very powerful factor in terms of influencing the level of librarian staffing. As far as those state mandates go, the interesting thing we found, the surprising thing we found, was that we asked not only is there a mandate or not, but is it enforced or not?
So it's not always enforced?
It's not always, and they would admit it. And what we found was that the states with the best staffing were ones where there was a mandate that was enforced. No surprise there. Surprisingly, to me at least, if there was a mandate, but it wasn't being enforced, that's the next best off group. And then the states where there's no mandate at all had the lowest levels of staffing. But isn't that interesting that if there's a mandate still on the books, but it's not being enforced, apparently people will enforce it on themselves. So
Keith,
that was
Keith, if I could ask if there was is there a specific geographic region, or was there any pattern you saw geographically to those states?
It's not a strictly geographic pattern, but it's very interesting to note that the majority of those states with mandates are in the South of all places. There are a few states in other parts of the country, but the largest concentration of them is in the South. So that's an interesting, and I guess would think for most people, unexpected fact. So what state you're in, big factor, the mandate issue, a big part of that. In terms of characteristics of districts, we looked at three things: the size of the enrollment of the district, the location of the district. Is it in the central city in a metropolitan area? Is it in a suburb? Is it in an outlying town? Is it in a rural area? That's the way NCES classifies them in terms of location. And then thirdly, we looked at the district's level of funding. What's their per pupil expenditure? And interesting findings there. For enrollment in locale, we found what I think most people would probably expect. The larger the district in terms of enrollment, the more likely they are to have librarians in every school, the less likely they are to have no librarians at all. In terms of locale, metropolitan districts, city districts, more likely to have librarians in every school, less likely to not have them at all. And of course, the flip side of that for rural areas. They're the least likely to have librarians in every school, most likely to have no librarians at all. The funding variable was a bit of a surprise.
So you would
We
think that schools with more funding would have more librarians, right?
You would, wouldn't you? Because what do we hear all the time? If we ask people, why are librarian positions being cut? Oh, we just love librarians, but we just didn't have enough money.
Yeah.
So we expected a correlation there. Surprisingly, we didn't find it.
What do you know?
We divided up. We divided districts up into 4 categories. Ones that the NCES uses in their own analyses. Districts that spend 15,000 plus per student, ones that spend 12 to 15,000, ones that spend 10 to 12,000, ones that spend less than 10,000. And very interestingly, what we found is that the districts that had the best staffing were the richest and the poorest.
What do you know? Wow.
And the ones that were the odd ones out were in between. Totally unexpected. That intrigued us a bit. So we looked a little further. We thought, well, interesting. This is not what we expected with librarians. What do you suppose is going on with other staff? So we looked across the board. We looked at how librarian staffing was changing and how other kinds of staffing was changing. District level administrators, building level administrators, classroom teachers, and librarians. And I've been teasing Deb for now years, because one of our first charts in the perspectives report, I have an elevator speech version of, and it's this. This is a group called instructional coordinators, and this is librarians. And other administrators are kind of in between. Teachers are a flat line in the middle. But so isn't that interesting? Because over this time period, when we've heard a lot about the financial duress that schools and the districts have been under, all these other positions are going up in terms of FTE, and librarians are the only one of those 4 groups of educator types that we looked at that was consistently going down. So you can't sell us on the it's all about money argument. It just doesn't wash when you look at the data.
Keith, yes. I wanted to ask, are you seeing a combination of the librarian roles getting wrapped up within or traded out for some of those other positions?
Well, see, that's what the current piece of the project is about, the interviews that we've done. We've got about 50 interviews with administrators all over the country. And what we're hoping to learn from them is the answer to that question. We know that the definitions for all positions that NCES collects data about are pretty dated. I mean, if you saw the definition of a librarian, you'd probably wince a little bit, because it doesn't even mention computers or the internet. You know, it's seriously out of date. So hopefully people are pretty much looking, who report the data, are looking at the titles that they're reporting for. But that's the other thing we learned from their perspectives report. One of the biggest things from my point of view as a data person, this data is not by any means perfect. Now, no data is perfect, but we know from our very close examination of this NCES data that there's some major data quality issues there, and we addressed as many of those as we could. We actually didn't use the NCES data just as we downloaded it from NCES. There were serious problems in some states. There's missing data in some states, so we went to those states and either we got state data if we could that was what we wanted. It was comparable to what others had reported to NCES. And if we didn't find data, then of course that state is not represented. That was mostly a problem in our attempt to look at the impact of COVID over time. We had 4 states that we couldn't include in that analysis because we didn't have good data pre and post COVID. So, you can only do what you can do. But we did the best we could with the data that's there. The thing to remember about the data is the sad fact is that if anything, the data tends to minimize the problems we're concerned about rather than exaggerate them. Now, there are a few isolated cases where it does exaggerate them, but generally across the board, the defects in the data and the limitations of the data tend to minimize our ability to assess the loss of librarian positions.
And I imagine there's some hidden data as well. For instance, I know that some of the students in my classes are serving more than one school, and they might somebody might respond to a question saying there is a librarian in each school when that librarian is split in multiple parts.
Well, here's one of the things I really like about NCES's data. It's not headcount data. It's it's FTE data.
Oh, okay. So that would prevent that type of.
So that would discourage that problem. Now there's actually another survey NCES does, a sample survey that we're waiting for data from. We will be able to hopefully do one more special report based on that data. It's building level data, but unfortunately, it's head counts for staff.
I see.
To me, like head counts for full-time people, fine, no problem. Head counts for part-time people, not very meaningful. Yeah. Because if that there's two schools and they both have part-time people, and you don't know that one of them is there 3 hours a week and one of them is there 30 hours a week, what do you know? Not much, Yeah. So it's a real problem. We provide lots of feedback to NCS. I don't mean just our project. I mean, the school library community for literally decades have been giving NCES feedback about how they need to improve this data collection, but it's a time series data collection. Yeah. So they're very conservative about making changes in that, because if they make a serious enough change, then they have a new base year and they have to start all over with analysis. So I understand to some extent their reluctance, but it's kind of way past time for a serious overhaul in that system.
And Brenda, to your question, what we think is the category called instructional coordinator may be a catch-all where people are counting these combined and morphed positions between library services and technology because there is no other place to put them. And again, that definition is way out of date.
Yeah, absolutely. But as Deb just noted, that the interesting thing about that instructional coordinator title in the NCES data collection is it's an unusually broad title compared to the others. I mean, now school administrators include superintendents and all kinds of kind of middle management type people. That's nothing compared to the range that this instructional coordinator category can cover, because they can be district or building level, and they can basically specialize in just about anything. So one of the reasons we think it's this top line in my chart is because that's where we're betting. This is a guess, but I think it's a good one. We're guessing this is where people are reporting all of the testing coaches and the reading coaches and literacy coaches, all those specific new jobs that are being created to address, really in a targeted way, address test score issues. That to me is the only credible explanation for that category skyrocketing really over the last decade or two. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the impact of what state you're in and what region. We've talked about these characteristics of districts. Then we also look at some characteristics of students. And the two big things were race and ethnicity and poverty. And it's sad to say that in both of these cases, we found exactly what we expected to find. That districts that are majority minority, and particularly those that are majority Hispanic, are much less likely to have librarians in every school, much more likely to have no librarians at all. Same goes for poverty. Now, this is where we have to be really clear with everyone. On the district side, we're looking at funding. That's an economic issue. In this case, we're looking at the families the students are coming from. They're categorized in terms of poverty based on, and this is what drives whether or not students are eligible for the National School Lunch Program. But it's not who's enrolled in that program, it's who's eligible to be enrolled in it. So that's kind of the general all-purpose indicator of poverty in education research. So
I think one of the things that really popped out to me in the student characteristics was the Hispanic. That I was actually shocked that the majority Hispanic districts were the ones that had the least number of school librarians, and that really jumped out.
Yeah,
and I saw that in the Peabody paper as well, and I, it's really powerful when you point to it as librarian privilege, and note that the information literacy rate of these students is likely to be limited by the limited personnel that are devoted to that type of work.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
that was shocking. So this was not about poverty. It was just about this particular ethnicity.
Yes. So race and ethnicity, generally non-white, majority non-white districts, very much more disadvantaged. Majority Hispanic, over far and away the most disadvantaged. When we did our COVID analysis, we compared data for the 2018-19 school year, the last complete school year before COVID, with the latest data, which is for the 2021 school year. So it's the first school year after we knew COVID was happening, the first school year that started with us knowing about COVID. Because of course that would have been August, September 2020. And what we found there, interestingly enough, is that the really disadvantaged group in terms of relative loss pre-post COVID was majority Black or African American districts. They were twice as likely as other districts to lose their librarians.
Really?
Yes. So really dramatic change there. We didn't, in terms of change, we didn't see as much change for majority Hispanic districts because, as we learned in the perspectives report, they were already in pretty bad shape to begin with and didn't have anyone to lose by the time we got to this side of COVID.
So we have this quantitative data, and we won't know the reasons for this until you really dig into the qualitative stuff later on.
Well, unfortunately, then in most qualitative research is
not causality.
Is based on relatively small numbers of cases, and causality, but not really in the game if you're doing qualitative research. What you're looking to do in qualitative research is explore kind of what's going on, what's the range of different things that are happening. And that's what we expect to find there. If you like, I'll go ahead and sort of head over into that topic. Of course, what we're actually doing right now is coding the data from our 50 interviews. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting exercise all by itself.
So you're not ready to identify any patterns at this point.
There are 5 of us who are coding interviews. So I've got 10 interviews to code, and I'm just finishing my 5th one. So I'm only halfway through my group. So I wouldn't.
We will be waiting with bated breath on this.
Well, and of course, the problem with qualitative research is you cannot generalize.
Of course.
You can learn about the range of things that are happening, but you can't really generalize from it because you couldn't have enough cases.
But Keith and Deb, we've never had any studies of this before, to my knowledge. So it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. By the way, the other thing that one of the great surprises of this project for Deb and me has been, we've had not one, but two people volunteer to work on it with us. So we're very, very fortunate in that regard. And one of our volunteers did an analysis for us, comparing all local school districts with the school districts that we got interviews from. We had more than one interview in some districts. So I think there were about 45 districts represented in the interviews. And I was really surprised about this. Looking at all those characteristics we talked about: enrollment, locale, funding level, race, ethnicity, poverty. Only one of those do we have a really strong bias about in our interview group. I'm very surprised. I thought it'd be way worse than it is.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if I'm just going to make up numbers, if 10% of school districts serve enrollments of 25,000 or more, we'd only want 10% of our interviews to be that group. Same with locale, same with race, ethnicity, same with poverty. I'm not surprised this is the one thing. I'm just surprised we're doing as good as we are on everything else. Locale is our big bias factor. We're very, very high, overly represented on city districts. We have if this was some sort of a sample that we were going to weight, we would have to deflate our data on cities and inflate our data on rural areas to make it more representative.
And I do want to point out that of the people we interviewed, we have basically three different groups. Some of the districts actually added librarians. Some districts reduced the number they had. And then the third group is a group that has not had school librarians for a very long time. Yeah. So we're really looking at all three of those.
One thing that I noticed in one of the studies, it might have been perspectives, was that the people who have lost librarians, or districts or schools, were very unlikely to replace them.
Right.
In fact,
one time out of 10, we looked at, I think it was our latest data for the perspectives report was 18-19, so pre-COVID, of course. And then I think we compared to 14-15, maybe 15-16, but I think it was 14-15. And if they didn't have any librarians in the earlier year, only one district out of 10 had reported any librarians 5 years or so later.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
So it's like, as Deb has said many times, once they're gone, it's really difficult to get them back.
Mm-hmm.
It's not impossible, but it's a big, big challenge, and the odds are definitely against it. Yeah. Let's see. As Deb said, we have these three groups: the gainers, the losers, and the eliminated group. Now, when we were just talking about this as a proposal idea, one of the things Deb and I talked about a lot was, is there any chance in the world that some administrator who has cut librarians or who hasn't had one for 10 years is even going to be willing to talk to us? Amazingly, they were. So we were very fortunate in that respect that we got people in all three of those groups to talk to us. So that's great. We've got, because those are three really different situations, and we wanted to know what the thinking is.
Are you getting honest? Do you feel like people are, because I think that when you talk about libraries and ask how people feel about them, it's like apple pie, and a person would be embarrassed to say, "Oh, they're not necessary for my children."
Well, so far I haven't actually coded any interviews based on the eliminated group, so I can't speak to that myself. So far I've just had ones that gained, ones that reduced, but it will be very interesting to see what they say.
We did have very pointed questions that we really tried to drill down into what were your priorities? What was the highest priority? I mean, we really kept at that to try to drill down into their thinking. And, you know, I've done about 5 interviews, coded them already. And just talking with our other interviewers, we've certainly had several Zoom sessions. I do believe that these interviews are genuine.
Okay.
People that agreed to talk to us are telling us what they really think.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, we thought, oh, they'll be ashamed or they'll be embarrassed and they won't want to talk to you. Oh, no, they're perfectly fine with their decisions. You know, that whatever decision they made, I mean, this is my perception so far, whatever decision they made, they think they made the best decision they could given the limitations within which they were working. You know,
Right. And as Deb said, they were juggling priorities, and you acknowledged that in their decision making.
And I'm sure this will be true of cases where librarians were eliminated. You know, some of the people whose interviews I've coded who added librarians, we asked them what were the trade-offs, and they said, well, because we added librarians, we couldn't hire more counselors, or we couldn't hire more art teachers or whatever, you know. So they understand. I mean, I've always been sympathetic to administrators. You know, they are in a heck of a position. You know, they know they've got to make a decision that's going to hurt somebody. They know whatever they do is going to be a bad thing. They just have to figure out what's going to be the least bad thing they can decide to do. So I'm really quite sympathetic to them. Now, what we've figured out so far, that we think this will be the skeleton, the structure of the Voices report, our report about our interviews. Besides the 3 groups, the gainers, the losers, the eliminated, we see so far, but just because of the variety of factors we've heard about, we see 3 kinds of decisions. One are structural decisions. We've actually had people say to us in their interviews, you know, I didn't decide this. You know, we have rules in our district that say, you know, if your enrollment is A to B, you get a full-time librarian. If it slips down a category, you only get 3/4 of a librarian. So it's like, it's actually, from their perception, it's not a decision. You know, it's driven by some structural factor. The most obvious thing, if a school opens or a school closes, well, you know, if a school closes, yeah, there's probably going to be one less librarian in that district, that sort of thing. The largest group of factors in terms of variety is what I am calling the pragmatic decisions. And the word that we've heard over and over about a lot of different things is coverage.
Yeah.
The clue in the interview that this is going to be a pragmatic decision is they're talking about coverage. You know, who's going to watch the kids while the teachers have planning time? Well, we know what we think of that. We won't go into that. You know, but that's one coverage issue. You know, it can get really ugly. You know, who's going to watch the kids during lunchtime and recess? I mean, there are all these coverage things that they get concerned about, understandably. I mean, you know, kids have to be supervised, but it actually ends up driving decisions about staffing. And then, of course, the other category, and the one that I think we all are inclined to assume all the decisions are what we call strategic decisions. In other words, it's an actual voluntary decision that they're making to achieve some goal that they want to achieve. You know, in my case with my gainer districts so far, I've coded the interview for one superintendent who was asked repeatedly to identify, you know, what was the big factor that drove your decision to hire more librarians. And they kept trying to push her into one of our anticipated categories. And she just kept adamantly saying, Because it was because I decided we're going to have librarians.
It's that, it's funny. I love the notion of these buckets for the reasoning about this. So you had structural, did I get it wrong? Procedural?
Pragmatic,
and strategic.
Yeah. Well,
and
the reason I think those three categories are so important is because they call for completely different strategies if you want to do anything about what's going on. If it's, you need to know if the loss of a position is being driven by some structural factor that even the supposed decision maker doesn't have much control over, you've either got to change the rules or learn to live with them, don't you? If it's a pragmatic issue, oh golly, I used to say this when I go around speaking about impact studies. I would say this all the time. If it was an all librarian audience, I would always say, remember, whatever you do, if you can possibly help it, don't go to your administrators complaining about something. They got plenty of people complaining about things. Go to them with a solution.
Yeah.
They're going to be really happy to see you.
So I wonder, it feels to me like there would be subcategories or sub buckets within this. And so I'm wondering if there is a part of the strategic that is also aspirational in some way.
Oh, absolutely. And even in the interviews I've coded so far, you absolutely get that idea that they're very aspirational. And the administrators I've coded so far, they're really clear that the reason they want a librarian in every school is because they perceive it as an absolutely critical equity issue. They want every kid in their district to get a good education, and their belief that they are very clear about is if they don't have a librarian in their school, they cannot be getting an equally high quality education. But anyway, as I was saying, I think it's really important to distinguish those three different kinds of decisions because they're very, very different situations. We're inclined to think about the strategic decisions, like well, they just don't love us enough, or they just don't get it.
It's hard not to bring your emotion into this, isn't it?
They just
I know this has driven your research for a long time.
Yeah. They just don't understand how important we are, and that's probably true in a lot of these strategic decision cases. But if it's a more pragmatic decision or it's a structurally driven one, then that's just totally off base. It's not relevant to what's actually made that happen in that district.
This is fascinating. I love the notion of these categories and potentially subcategories, but I do want to make sure we have time for a couple more things. I know, because I've been part of the advisory group, that you also have opened, and it's part of, I imagine, the IMLS guidelines, that you've opened some of your resources to the public, including the research tools, the data tools. Can you give a little brief introduction to those?
Well, I'm really excited about the data tools because individuals can go in and select and export exactly what they want to know about their school district or somebody else's, their state, and state requirements like Keith was talking about, the staffing mandates. So you can also go in and compare your district to similar districts by choosing many of those district and student characteristics. Maybe you want to compare to a district that has the same enrollment as you or the same locale. And then
very powerful at a board meeting, I bet.
Yeah, absolutely. And all that is exported. And the thing that our web designer is working on right now that we're really excited about is that we've asked him to do a one-page PDF of a district. So with one click, you're going to be able to download that little chart that shows the comparison of school librarians to other educators, the chart that goes this way. And some raw statistics about the district, and then some other resources. So all of that is currently in development, but we're really hoping that people, the general public, librarians, administrators, come to our site and use those tools to pull out the data that they need for whatever issue they're trying to initiate in their district.
So, and Deb, is that completely available now?
Yes.
At this time?
The only thing that's not available yet is the PDF one page. So there's a custom search, there's a district comparison. You can go in and get the state profile if you want state information and compare your state to other states. And then that state survey data that we did in the fall of 2020 is also in there about staffing mandates, higher education institutes that prepare school librarians by state, a lot of information that you may want about state and school districts.
That's very exciting.
A couple of other things about the data tools. We knew going into this that this data that we used for our perspectives report, it's been out there forever, since the mid 80s at least. Mm-hmm. And it's hidden. It might as well be hidden. I mean, nobody knows it's there. It's not that hard to download it from the NCS website, but once you download it, particularly if it's 13,000 districts like we did, can you imagine working with a spreadsheet with 13,000 lines in it? Who wants to do that? So we knew we wanted to create tools that would make it much, much easier for people to access the data. And one of the things that's been done more recently to improve those data tools that Deb just described to you is we now have embedded tutorials. So literally, as you go through step by step, you get instruction about how to get to the next step. Great. Really, really excellent, I think. We could have done a tutorial video, come up with some canned examples and take you through step by step how to do it. I'm not sure how useful that would be. If in fact, you can go in there and literally get step by step guidance as you're constructing your own search, I think it's much more useful. Yeah.
That's great. Well, we'll be sure to put the links to the data tools and everything else on the pages for the video and for the podcast.
And something that's sadly a depressing picture in all too many cases on that state profile. We had something developed that we kind of dreamed about. We were afraid it wouldn't be possible, but it was, and it's very dramatic. We've got 10 years worth of data. Well, now 12 and counting. 10 years, 12 years of data. And we got the school district map of every state. And that data for every one of those 12 years is connected to that map. And you can click go, and that map will go 9, 10, 10, 11, 11, 12, 12, 13, right up to the 2021 school year and show you. And it's so vivid because you can see the librarians disappearing in a lot of places, and you can see, you get some sense of of how mild or how severe an issue it is in your particular state. And those 15 states I mentioned to you that have mandates, they're solid green the whole time. Nothing changes.
I know we've talked about this in the advisory group, but. Are you worried about showing those data to people who are looking for a reason to get rid of librarians, to show, well, they're declining in these places?
Well, that's, the going into this project, we knew that one of the biggest concerns that people in the school library community in particular were going to raise is yes, we all know our jobs are disappearing, but for Pete's sakes, don't make it a bandwagon for them to jump on.
Yeah. So
there's definitely that hazard is there. But one of the things we're hoping, if in fact, you can go in there and literally get step by step guidance as you're constructing your own search, I think it's much more useful. Yeah.
That's great. Well, we'll be sure to put the links to the data tools and everything else on the pages for the video and for the podcast.
And something that's sadly a depressing picture in all too many cases on that state profile. we had something developed that we kind of dreamed about. We were afraid it wouldn't be possible, but it was, and it's very dramatic. We've got 10 years worth of data. Well, now 12 and counting. 10 years, 12 years of data. And we got the school district map of every state. And that data for every one of those 12 years is connected to that map. And you can click go, and that map will go 9, 10, 10, 11, 11, 12, 12, 13, right up to the 2021 school year, and show you, and it's so vivid because that you can see the librarians disappearing in a lot of places. And you can see, you get some sense of the of how mild or how severe an issue it is in your particular state. And those 15 states I mentioned to you that have mandates, they're solid green the whole time. Nothing changes.
I know we've talked about this in the advisory group, but are you worried about showing those data to people who are looking for a reason to get rid of librarians, to show, well, they're declining in these places?
Well, that's, the going into this project, we knew that one of the biggest concerns that people in the school library community in particular were going to raise is like, yes, we all know our jobs are disappearing, but for Pete's sakes, don't make it a bandwagon for them to jump on.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that hazard is there. But one of the things we're hoping, the most important word in the whole title of the project to me is the E.
Yeah, evolution.
All we can tell from the existing data we have is what's going on with school librarians. Well, who knows? What we may find out from some of these interviews is, well, yeah, we're saying we don't have school librarians to NCES, but that's because we call them something else and we've completely reconceived the job. Right. That's the evolution part. Yeah. So, I think we have to be open-minded enough to, if the profession's going to evolve into something else, at least in some places, we've got to accept that reality, because frankly, it's already happened in a lot of those places. We can like it or not like it, but it's a done deal, Yeah.
And it is interesting in these interviews to hear the other side, like we attend library conferences, we buy the AASL standards, and we are told what we're to do and what we're expected to do and our standards, etc. But now we're hearing from the other side. What do administrators expect from us? And why are we either meeting that expectation or we're not?
That's an important message we need to hear.
Yeah,
absolutely. And something, and one of the things we don't like to acknowledge or even talk about is something that we hear about in these kinds of interviews. And that is that, and frankly, when I've talked to all administrator audiences, I give them a hard time about this. I'll just give you the bit I usually say for the end of my presentations to a group like that. I would say, how many of you have ever had a bad math teacher in your school? And practically everyone in the room, of course, raises their hands. And then I say, and how many of you have stopped teaching math?
Excellent.
Well, we all know what happens if a school ends up with a not particularly good school librarian. That's a job that's probably going to get cut. It's like that sort of thinking needs to be challenged too. It's like, no, you don't need to get rid of the job. You need to get someone in the job who can do it properly.
That's a really important message, and I hope it's well received at these sessions. We don't have much time. There's been some powerful information here that I'm hoping our students will inform it'll inform our students' preparation and our practitioners' practice. And I know that the tools are going to be valuable. I wanted to end with some fun questions. So I'm going to ask Deb about, you've been researching for many years, Deb. And what are your research superpowers?
Well, I think I have to go with persistence. Advocating for school library programs and librarian positions is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And it is so easy to eliminate a position and so incredibly difficult to restore it. And so, whenever you get into this area of research, it's always trying to find those gems that we hope that we will find, especially in this qualitative part, that will resonate with some of these decision makers who will say, yeah, you've got a point. I have to rethink the path that I'm on. And changing people's perceptions and expectations is very difficult, and it takes a lot of time. You have to be really committed.
Thanks, Deb. That is a superpower I've always admired in you.
Thanks.
And Keith, I know you knew my friend, Dr. Ross J. Todd, very well. Has he inspired or influenced your work in any way?
Oh boy, what a loss Ross is to us all. And not only was he a dear friend, but also an incredibly inspiring leader. I remember the first time I attended a Treasure Mountain research conference and heard Ross speak the first time. I'll never forget it. I mean, was so inspiring. And but not only to library school students in general, but in particular to the researchers in the field. And boy, that was quite a contribution to make. It's we are much the poorer for having lost him. Yeah.
Thank you both. We're so grateful that you joined us on this very first school library research podcast. I hope that the audience for this will make use of our guest resources and contact information on the podcast and the video page. And we are just incredibly grateful for your time and your talents in furthering this profession. Thanks so much.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye for now. Whoops.